This podcast is for you if you want to learn about the wonderful and wacky world of the English language and the people who speak it. If you want to learn English, speak English, and understand different speakers of English, then you're in the right place and you're going to love our podcast episode today. Welcome to English World with Kris Amerikos. We are a team of language lovers, expert teachers, and native speakers who are on a mission to help people around the world speak English and show the world their true value. We correct mistakes, practice pronunciation, and explore grammar rules while drinking coffee and having fun. So get comfortable, relax, grab a pen and paper, and welcome to the show. Today's episode is brought to you by English Every Day, an unlimited speaking practice program where you can join live speaking practice lessons with professional native teachers 5 times every day. There are a lot of courses on the internet and a lot of useful videos too, but the one thing that is missing for most English learners is practice. And if you need speaking practice, then English Every Day is for you. So click the link in the description or go to krisamerikos.com to learn more today. All right, so today we have Jennifer with us from JForrest English. And Jennifer has been teaching English for quite some time, and she has a really big following on YouTube. So Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with me today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so tell us your story. How did you get started and how did you get to where you are now?
Accidentally arrived on YouTube. It certainly was not my plan to develop a YouTube following. It happened quite organically. So I was working in a job totally not related to teaching English, which I didn't like very much. So I decided to quit that job and just spend some time traveling. And I became certified as an English teacher more as a hobby or just something I could do while I'm traveling to support my travels. And then I started teaching. I loved it. I absolutely loved teaching. And then I started teaching students on the side while I was trying to get what my real job going, which I wanted to do something different. And then just more students started coming. I uploaded one of the videos on social media just really for the students I was teaching, and it snowballed and took off and eventually turned into what we have today.
Students always find a way to find a good teacher.
Well, thank you for that.
So you said that at one point, like there was something else, like a real job, like something else that you were considering. For me, that happened too. Like when I moved back to the States from Russia, I went and got certified as a real estate agent, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna completely shift into something else. And the passion for English brought me back. But yeah, I'm interested. What was that other thing for you?
For me, I always wanted to be a writer, more so a copywriter, writing magazine articles. So I had this grand idea. I've always loved traveling. So I had this grand idea that people would pay me to travel and I'd write articles for them, or companies would hire me to write for them, but send me all these exotic places. So I guess I've always loved the English language from a writing perspective. I've always loved writing. It's something I do as a hobby now. And so that's what I wanted to do, but then got too busy working with students and never pursued it. And I have no regrets at all.
That's awesome. Yeah, because it's all about language. I find like people that love language, they can go into different areas, but it's all kind of connected. Even with people who write songs, they're using the language to express something, and it's all kind of one thing.
Yeah, it's so true. And I work with my students a lot now with their writing and helping them improve their writing. So I guess in a lot of ways, I'm still involved in writing, just a totally different style than I ever thought I would do before.
So you're from Canada, right? And
That's correct.
a lot of students ask me if Canadian English and American English are different things. And then there's North American English. And so they both kind of get put in this category. But what do you think are some of the differences in how people speak, in language?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for all my students watching, they know I'm proud to be Canadian. I don't advertise to my students too often I'm from Canada, just to not confuse them because of that exact thing. Because I find students are like, well, what is Canadian English? I don't know if I want to learn Canadian English. So I always tell my students, I'm from Canada. I teach American English. And sometimes I put in brackets North American English because Canada is obviously in North America. Now, from a practical perspective, I personally do not think there are differences between Canadian and American English that warrant it being categorized as something different. Because in British English, there are definitely real differences in grammatical structures, vocabulary, things like that. I would not be able to teach British English because I don't speak it. And then, of course, there's the pronunciation, the accent is quite different. Now, American and Canadian English, they share the exact same grammatical structures, vocabulary. There's no difference in that regard. There are, of course, some differences in pronunciation, but Canada is a huge country. The US is a huge country, and there's different regional differences in pronunciation among both countries. So I don't see that being unique to Canadian English versus American English. It's just where you live geographically within North America.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people haven't really thought about it that way. So that's really cool. Um, Maybe there's some words or like pronunciate specific things that come to mind that are a little different.
Well, I don't know if you heard it, but there is a stereotype that Canadians say the word about very differently. And I have never met a Canadian that actually pronounces it as a boot, but perhaps you have. But there is this like comical stereotype. It's on Saturday Night Live or other late night comedy shows. Whenever they make fun of a Canadian, they always say a boot. A boot. What you talking a boot? But I've never heard a Canadian say that before.
That's funny. Yeah, I've heard that stereotype. I have. Um, and it's funny when I was going through my teacher training, when was that? 2009, and there was a girl there from Minnesota who was in our group, and she had these things that are kind of what Americans associate with Canadian English, but it's really like the Great Lakes region. And so she would say something, and the British, counselor or teacher, he would sometimes be like, "What? That doesn't sound right," because he hadn't heard that before. But that was really interesting. And yeah, it's not just Canada, and Canada's so big, like you pointed, it's bigger than the United States.
Yeah, bigger, of course, geographically, but insignificant in terms of population. Canada is such a tiny country. So our level of influence in the language is so small. We just basically do what our neighbors are doing and take our cues from American English.
Are there some spelling differences too?
Yeah, so that's kind of a weird thing, to be honest, is that so Canada used to be part of the Commonwealth, or I guess technically still is. So under British rules. So we used British spelling rules. But since we're so distant from them geographically, we never adopted their pronunciation or their vocabulary or grammar because we're just so close to the United States, because Canada is a very young country as well compared to the US and obviously to Britain. So for some reason, we adopted their spelling rules, but it's very, very minor. For example, we add a U in color. So words that end in OR, we add a U to them for the British ones. But
Like favorite, is that also one? Favorite?
yeah, exactly. But personally, since I do teach American English, I do not do that.
Okay.
So I just don't write that way. But there is like a spell checker. If you use Canadian, the spell checker, it will add that extra U for you. But aside from that U on the spelling, I can't identify any other spelling differences.
Hmm. Cool. And as a US person, I shouldn't say American, I think, because it's the term American is so like has so many things attached to it sometimes, like especially my friends from South America or from Central America, they're like,
Like,
well,
I'm
we're American
American.
too. And you're Canadian, America, it's all right, North and South America. So as a US person, uh living abroad, growing up, I would be in these situations where people would basically tell me, like, if you want to be safe, tell people that you're from Canada, not from the US, because a lot of people don't like the US. And so they would tell me, you'll be safer telling people that you're Canadian. And so I always had this idea traveling, and I know a lot of Americans, maybe have you heard this from Americans before?
Yeah, I have heard that as well. I've heard that Americans will put a Canadian flag on their backpack or something like that
Yeah.
so when they're traveling, travelers, they often wear backpacks. So if tourists see there's a Canadian flag on it, they'll treat them better than they would if they had assumed they were American. But I have heard that as a stereotype. I have no idea how many Americans actually do that, and I have no idea if it's effective or not. But I have heard that as a common stereotype.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say it, but yeah, I don't think it's effective. I had a
Yeah.
situation in Russia, and my Russian friend called the Canadian guy American. He's like, "No, I'm not American. I'm Canadian." And he's like, "Oh, it's the same thing." And so, like,
Oh,
for
yeah.
some people, it's just like, "Oh, that's the same. They're the same."
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it totally depends on their cultural influences, like what they learn in Russia versus what they learn maybe in France or something about Canada versus the US. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that stereotype or that reference that, oh, just put a Canadian flag and people will treat you better. I do know culturally we have a reputation for being very friendly. And but there's so many cultural differences between Canada in the sense that we're such a young country. We didn't have a revolution. We were just formed very, politically. I assign you as Canada. So we don't come from having a background of violence or anything like that. So I perhaps it's just easier for us to be a little more friendly because we don't have that within our culture.
Cultural baggage. Oh,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, give us some time. We're young. Give us some time. I'm sure we'll have our own baggage eventually.
that's cool. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting way to put it. I see that a lot of students, they when they're learning English, they start studying rules, and it's all rules, rules, rules. I just need to know the rules. And like, if I know the rules, then somehow that's going to magically make all the stuff come out of the mouth correctly. And so, a lot of times they struggle to understand the cultural element, even if they learn a lot of the rules. And so they might be able to say things at a high level, use big words, but then sometimes the way they're saying it or the thing that they're saying, it's just like, that's not, like, it just doesn't make sense for the culture. Or it's like they're trying to bring over the first language culture too much into the second language. One example is like use of indirect language in English. This can be difficult to kind of master, when you should be indirect to be polite, and then but not to show that you're not confident. So, like, where's the balance? Those kinds of things. Have you seen them struggling with uh cultural fluency?
And I think it's something that most language learners struggle with for sure. And because you learn English just in a classroom setting with textbooks. You learn it in a very standardized way for the purpose of passing a language exam in order to get a certificate. So for that purpose, the rules matter and you're being graded, you're being judged on those rules. So you need it. But then the struggle for myself and you, I assume as an English teacher, is a student talks to you, and although it's grammatically correct, you think to yourself, I would never say that. My friends would never say that. I don't hear that. That's not the way the language is actually used in the real world. So I think it's difficult for a student to understand because it's a foreign language to them. They don't understand those subtleties. Only us as teachers understand the subtleties of whether or not they're using the language correctly, but they also sound natural. They're using it in a way that isn't outdated or makes them sound like a textbook. They're using it in a real way and they sound fluent and correct. And that's a very difficult thing for a teacher to accomplish. So you really have to find a method that works. You have to find a way to teach the students in a way that they're learning the rules, but they're also learning the cultural elements, when and how to use the language. So it's a difficult job for English teachers to make sure that students do learn the language in that way.
Yeah, a lot of balls to juggle at the same time, a lot of considerations.
Yeah, it definitely is. And students, they in my experience, they really want to be correct. They really want to use correct grammar. They really want to use advanced grammatical structures. It's really important to them. And I want them to sound correct as well, but I also want them to sound natural. So it's something that just really takes a lot of dedication from the teacher, because not everyone is going to make sure their students understand the culture at the same time.
Right, because it's easier to just open the textbook and go page by page.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, that's interesting that you brought up like being correct versus being natural, or sounding correct versus sounding natural. And it made me think about how many American people I've met who maybe have never gone to other countries. They've just been speaking English their whole life. And as an English teacher, when I hear them speak, I can find mistakes in their natural native speech. And so many students are afraid of that. I'm going to make a mistake. I need to sound correct. But those guys, they're not thinking about sounding correct at all. And they don't care. And if someone told them that they're not correct, they would be like, why would I care what you're saying? So well, I don't know if you have the same experience, if you've had the same experience in Canada with Canadian speakers, or if they're more grammatically correct in general. But what's your experience there?
There would be no difference between the US in that regard. They would make just as many mistakes, not know grammar rules at all, because of course we didn't study the language. We just absorbed the language by listening to our parents, listening to TV or teachers, whatever, and we absorbed the language. So certainly for me, it was difficult. When I became certified as an English teacher, I learned for the first time what an infinitive verb is, the different verb tenses in English. I had no idea. Yes, I spoke correctly. I knew exactly how to speak, but I couldn't explain why I formed a sentence in that way. I couldn't tell you what the grammar of that sentence is, because I didn't study grammar rules. I just speak the language naturally. So it's definitely not something that native speakers know how to do, and nor should they. There's no requirement for them to pass a language exam. It's just not something they need to spend their time on. And certainly when we're having conversations, we're not thinking about our grammar or anything like that, because why would we? We're talking about the movie we just watched, or the book we read, or what we're going to do this weekend. That's what we're interested in, not the language is just the tool of how we get to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, when I was teaching like 50 or 60 hours a day, it was like ingrained in my brain, and so then I would meet American people and speak with them, and then it's just running in your brain as a teacher. It's just like in the background, you're analyzing, and um, sometimes it was really hard to turn off, you know?
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes because, being an English teacher is just always on your mind. Sometimes when I am listening to conversations, I do notice things that they said incorrectly, but I do it to myself as well. As I'm speaking, I heard that just a second ago I said something in an awkward way, or maybe even I made a little mistake, but I don't stop, I don't correct it. I just keep going with the conversation. But is I notice them, but I don't care about them. But to be honest, this is the difference between the real world and classroom, even for us as teachers. If I had been preparing a lesson, I would go back and correct that mistake because I wouldn't want to teach my students something that's incorrect, even though when I use the language in a natural conversation, of course, I've been speaking for 20 minutes. Of course, I've made mistakes. I'm not perfect.
Yeah, sometimes it's crazy how sometimes people think like if you're a teacher, then you're not going to make any mistakes. But you would have to be not human to not make mistakes.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. It's like saying a basketball player never misses or
Yeah.
doesn't dribble in a weird way, or a chef will always put the right amount of spice in a dish every single time, or anything. Like, look to any profession. A coder will write perfect code that never results in any errors. We know that's not true. Like, there's no piece of code that is correct, even though it has the best engineers behind this code, because they're human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that a lot of students struggle with is like for you and me, for you and I, for you and me, I'm confusing myself here now, analyzing my own speech. We've both grown up speaking English, and so it's really easy for us to just say nonchalantly, like, I'm an English speaker, that's my identity. But for people who started off learning another language, sometimes that's a really difficult jump. Um, no matter how much the teacher tells them, no matter how many times they practice, sometimes something in the mind, something in their brain is saying, it's not really who you are, and creating this kind of barrier, like invisible barrier for them. And I guess that's what they call the language barrier, right? Um, so, so how can someone take on an English speaking identity, to be an English speaking person and accept that for themselves?
How you identify with yourself. Well, for example, right now, I would never identify as a painter because I don't paint. But if someone asked me, like, Jennifer, are you a writer? I would probably say, yes, I am, because even though I don't earn any money from writing, it's not my career. I've been writing my entire life. I've always considered it something that I really enjoy as well. So just for myself, I would never say I'm a painter because I don't paint. I don't know anything about art, but writing is something that is part of my life. So I would probably identify as a writer. So how does someone else identify as an English speaker rather than just a learner, or not even that? I guess they have to really add those impressions to them. The more they speak, the more frequently they speak, the more frequently they use their language, the more frequently they have conversations with people. And they don't, the focus is generally on speaking skills, but it doesn't have to be. They could write in English every day. They could watch movies in English. They could change all their phone settings and everything to English instead of their native language. And then their environment, every time they look around, they get all these reinforcements that English is part of their life. Just like if I wanted to identify as a painter, well, then I would have to start making painting part of something that I do consistently. And it would have to be within my world probably visually as well in my thoughts. And then just over time, I would slowly start accepting that as my identity. But I would never get there if I only painted once a month. And outside of that one thing, I also was not involved in the painting world at all. So it's just all those small impressions over time will just help you create that identity, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was wow. That was a really cool metaphor there with the painting. It's I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. The impressions, like you said, on yourself. That was really cool. Um, so it always brings us to this point of like native and non-native. And there's different teachers out there. And unfortunately, there's this thing, native speakerism, that people talk about, where there's this preference for finding a native speaker and studying with a native speaker, valuing those teachers more than non-native speakers, even when non-native speakers have a lot more experience and results. So what do you think are maybe the pros and cons of studying with a native speaker versus a non-native speaker?
Great question. I'm trying to think from my own experience because I'm also a language learner and have been more seriously at other times in my life. And from my perspective, I don't know, like if I were a student, I don't know if it would create that much of a distinction in my mind if they're a native speaker or a non-native speaker. It would just, for me, it would matter more their teaching style, how they teach, personality, if I get along with that person, if there's someone I want to follow. I think both have so much to offer. I don't think it's something that we really need to say, some native speakers or all native speakers are going to be better teachers, because I'm sure there are many native speakers that are terrible teachers and don't do a good job at all. And I'm sure the same applies to a non-native speaker. So I don't know if that is going to provide the qualification or the non-qualification to teach. I think if that non-native speaker is really passionate about the English language and it wants to share that language with others, and they find really great ways to connect with the student, I think that's really all that matters.
Absolutely agree. And like, every time we draw these categorizations, these lines, it's like it's never going to be perfect, right? Because it's always a gradient. Like, what is a non-native speaker? Like, if you
Yeah.
were born in the United States, lived in the United States your whole life, but English was not your first language, are you a native speaker?
Yeah.
Or if you grew up speaking English, but all your life you lived in a different country, are you a native speaker? And it's all these gray areas where then uh, these terms kind of become more of a power play. You know,
Hmm.
it's like it's not really even about language anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, and I for sure. And coming back to the art analogy, if I did want to be a painter, since my level of knowledge of painting is zero and my skill is zero, someone who is even just an art student, not even a professional painter, an art student could teach me so much because my level of art knowledge is zero and their level of knowledge is higher than mine. Now, as I increase in my skill and ability, I would need to find a teacher who's matched at that. But I don't need Picasso to teach me art. Anyone with some art ability will be able to teach me and provide those skills to me. And I've had many teachers throughout my life, like music teachers, for example, and others that have not been even professionals. They've just known more than me and were really great teachers. And I think anyone anyone who has a passion for the topic, that's already a great starting point to be a good teacher.
I agree with you. Yeah, and I like to tell my students that one of the best ways to learn something really deeply is to teach it to someone. And then they say, well, how could I teach? I'm still learning. And I say, if you know one word, you can teach someone who knows zero words. If you know two words, you can teach someone who knows one word. So you can always teach someone. Um,
Yeah, that's so true.
but it's pretty much the same thing that you said. And coming back to the non-native and native teachers, um, yeah, it's just like an arbitrary line so many people draw. It doesn't really mean anything.
And
Um,
especially as English does become the global language and more people are speaking it and using it, this idea that there is just one correct English doesn't even really exist anymore. And even aside from North American English, I'll say, and British English, well, there's still other countries that speak English as well. Many other countries, and they just don't usually get mentioned either, but they probably have their own pronunciation and perhaps even spelling rules that I've never even heard of.
yeah, yeah, that's the thing a lot of students forget about too, is that if I hear a bunch of Australians speaking with a lot of slang, there's a good chance I'm not going to know what they're saying.
Oh yeah,
And it's
definitely.
or someone from Ireland or Scotland, or because slang is so different, and so like, there's a lot of English that as a person who's been teaching English for over a decade, for a long time, and been all the books and all the I still don't know so much. Like I could never know all of it. And sometimes students don't really get that. They think like, oh, well, if you are a great teacher, then you know everything. But I think a great teacher has to, know what they don't know so they can draw that line and say, I can push you in the right direction for some things, but I can't take you all the way there for some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. And there are so many parts of the language that are maybe specific vocabulary to the medical profession that if I were having a conversation with a group of surgeons, I wouldn't know the vocabulary that they're using because there's no need for me to learn that vocabulary. If I tried to read a quantum physics advanced textbook, I would probably think it was written in German because it just I would not understand it, the
Same here.
vocabulary, what they're talking about, because so much of language is context, understanding the subject matter overall. And because I don't have that context, I would not understand how those concepts are being used. And that has happened to me because I am interested in a few topics that I don't have a background in. More, for example, quantum physics is legitimately something I'm interested in. And I have tried reading some books that I had to put down because I'm like, nope, not there, not yet. My level of knowledge is not there.
Same here. My brother studied physics, and not even quantum physics, just like regular physics. I was struggling with.
Yeah.
But so it's interesting because, language develops over time and technology improves over time. And right now we really see this intersection of technology and language in artificial intelligence, AI. Um, and a lot of teachers I've talked to kind of see it as a big threat to their job. Some companies have already put out AI teachers, and just this morning, I shared something in one of my groups, that Elon Musk is part of a company that just made a tutor that is $29 a month. And on the page, it says, like they're comparing the AI tutor to a human tutor. And for human tutor, they're saying like inefficient, doesn't follow the plan, like wastes time. And and I saw that, so I had to take a screenshot and share with the other teachers because it's like a direct attack. But most of the attacks aren't so direct. They're just like a wave of coming technology. So will we even be relevant as language teachers in, 10, 20 years? What do you think?
If I had the answer to that question, wow. I am not one to be alarmist, so I'm certainly not concerned about my future in the career because I understand that I need to adapt. Will I be teaching how I'm teaching today in 10 years? Most likely not. Most likely the way we're teaching right now will be obsolete in 10 years. How will it be obsolete? I don't know, because I can't predict what technology will be available, but most likely there will be technology that will force us to teach in a different way, or else we won't be relevant anymore. We might still keep teaching in the way we're teaching today, but nobody will be interested in that because technology has changed. It's like anything that has developed over time. The first thing I think of is Blockbuster, the movie, the rental movie store. For students watching, you probably don't know what Blockbuster is. It was a major company where you would go to a physical location and rent a movie or rent a DVD, take it home, watch it at home, and then return it and be penalized if you were late or didn't rewind it. But it was what we did on Friday, Saturday night. Let's go to Blockbuster and get a movie. Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore because they didn't adapt, they didn't change, they didn't think that this whole watching things online mattered. So if we're not willing to adapt and change or learn how to use these tools, then I think, yeah, we will definitely not have a job in 10 years. But of course, there will be something for us to do, but what that will be, I can't even predict. It's exciting to think what we could be doing in 10 years, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited about it too. And I agree with you. It's just a matter of adaptation. Um, some people say like AI won't take your job, a human using AI will.
Mm,
And
that's a
yeah,
good one.
it's like all the inventions throughout the years, right? If you never got on email, then you just never added in that skill. So there's just some new skills that people have to learn. And I think that's difficult for a lot of teachers because sometimes as a teacher, you get set in your ways. You learn the curriculum, you learn the way to do it, you find something that works, and then, you know, you're solidified in your identity as the teacher. And like the teacher is it's defined for you. These are the things that the teacher does. Um, but then you have to start adding on these other skills if you want to win in the marketplace. And so yeah, I see it as like it could be a difficult time for some people who refuse to adapt.
Yeah, and that's a great point and comes back to the identity question you talked about before, and also just understanding that your identity also has to be malleable. And if you are just stuck in your ways, it will be difficult for you to keep up with trends or keep up with new ways of doing things. And to be honest, sometimes that is a problem for students to be stuck in a way of learning because they spent all their time growing up in a classroom environment where they had to study and memorize verb conjugations, and that's all they did is just memorize long lists of verbs and then quiz themselves and be very upset if they got one of them wrong. And they might not be open to exploring that there's a better, more effective, and more enjoyable way to learn the language, or just be open to the fact, like we were talking about before, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have an accent, and you can still be a native speaker or speak fluently, identify as an English speaker with those.
Absolutely. So how do you feel about, you have a big YouTube channel and you've collaborated with a lot of other YouTube creators. And so how's your feeling about the whole YouTube English teaching community? Is it positive, negative? I'm sure you've got some instances of both. Life is that way, but overall, how do you feel about it?
I think it's pretty amazing what resources are out there, what teachers are doing. And a lot of times I hear from other teachers from my students because to be honest, although it is my industry, obviously I want to know who is in it as well. I am not watching English language videos, so I don't watch other videos, to be honest. So sometimes students will share things with me and be like, "Oh, Jennifer, you have to watch this video," or "Oh, Jennifer, can you teach us like in a similar way?" And then I'll click on someone else's YouTube channel, and there's this other English teacher with 1 million subscribers, and I had never heard of them before. And then they're teaching in just such a different way from mine, because there are so many different teachers, but we all have our unique personalities. We all have our unique focus, what we focus on. And I always refer my students to other teachers that I know if that student wants to learn something very specific that I don't specialize in, or if they want to learn British English, for example. And I think it's amazing that students have so many options for quality content by teachers who really care about their students, and it's all for free online. It's pretty amazing to be a student.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of resources out there, especially YouTube. And so I saw that you've just collaborated with so many different people. And why do you think collaboration works better than competition?
This word competition, we're taught to see other people as our competitors, and oh, that person has more subscribers than me, so they're my competitor. I'm not going to send my student over to them because they're my competitor. But students, I see them even trying to see each other as competitors. Oh, that person got a higher mark on this quiz than me, or they speak with less than an accent than I do, so somehow we're competitors. But obviously, that when you think of your students doing it, it seems like, of course, you're not competitors. So why would I want to think of another teacher as a competitor? It's just not, it's nothing that will help you stay motivated. Comparing yourself to others or viewing other people as competitors, for one, it's just not a very healthy perspective to have. And two, because like I said, so many teachers, we all have our own unique personalities. I know that I have a very specific background, story, my own biases, my own preferences for what I like to teach, how I like to teach. But then if I can do a collaboration, I can introduce my students to someone who speaks in a different way from me, who has different advice, different style of teaching. And it's just really beneficial for the students to be exposed to different people, different styles, different content, and it will open up their perspectives about the language as well.
Definitely. Yeah, that's really cool. That's a really cool way to put it. Um, and at the end of the day, the students know about all the teachers. Like it's like a billion people learning English, but they all know the same people. Like the higher up you get, the bigger you get, everybody knows everybody. And so your students are my students, are his students, are her students, and they're gonna go between the different programs. They're gonna try different stuff out, and they're gonna like it's so at the end of the day, we're all working together for the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I would just think of myself learning different topics. Sure, there are definitely certain teachers that I have that I go back to their YouTube channels more often than others, but sometimes YouTube will give me a random recommendation for someone I've never heard of. I watched their video and now I have a new teacher. They were amazing. So there's so much information, so much talent out there. And I think it's amazing that we get to benefit from that and learn from so many really high quality people.
It's so cool. Yeah. So where can everyone find you?
Well, right on YouTube, you can just look for JForrest English. You can find me there.
Awesome. And I'll put the link to the channel and any other resources under this video and under the podcast episode for anybody who's listening. Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. It was a great chat. I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to English World with Kris Amerikos. Now, it's your turn. Don't just listen to English, speak English with us every day. Join our English Everyday speaking program today. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.